I'm going to go through now the process of creating a 3D logo, animating it, and rendering it out for Flash and QuickTime. So the first thing I'm going to do when creating a 3D logo is I'm going to import some EPS files. Since mostly with clients, at least I've found with clients that I've worked with, that they already have their logo in a EPS file format. Either it was created in Illustrator or freehand for the purpose of print, and you can just use that same file to import into Amorphium to create a 3D object. So I have Illustrator in the background here, and I'm going to show you this sample logo, and of course SL, sample logo. So this is my sample logo for showing you this particular project. And now if I were to save this out as an EPS and then import this in, it would be one object, and all these four pieces would be one object. If I wanted each of these to be separate pieces, I would want to select just the objects I don't want and delete them and then save out as individual pieces. And I've already done that with the objects that I want to have together. So for example, here I've got an EPS of just the outer rings, and then I also have one here that I saved out of just the S and the L. So now that I've got those files as EPS files already ready to go, I'm going to come back into Amorphium now and just import them. So to import the EPS files, then I just go to import. And also one thing to keep in mind too is that when you're saving out an EPS file, at least from Illustrator 9, be sure to select 8.0 version of EPS or earlier, because the 9.0 version of EPS files don't always import correctly. Sometimes it won't import at all. So use 8.0 or earlier if you're using Illustrator. So to import my EPS file, then I just want to select it and hit open. Now it should bring up the import or the extrude dialog box for that import. And I'm going to want this is depth is a little too big, so I'm going to make it more like 12. And we can go ahead and leave a bevel on it, and I'm going to want to leave it 3D creased, because creased will again make the edges nice and crisp. And I'm going to change the quality to be maximum, so I have a lot of polygons in there to work with. And I'm not going to worry about the color because I'm going to change the color in Paint. It's easier than trying to change all the color values here. So once I want to do that, I just hit done, and you can see it's created that shape. And because it doesn't currently import the color of the EPS file, if I really wanted to get exact, I could get the actual RGB values or CMYK values. If I go into the system picker and change to a CMYK, or on the PC it actually has CMYK on the bottom. If you want to get the exact values, just write down those values and type them in here. But I'm just going to get close. Since I know it was a gray, I'll just pick a kind of a darker gray here and go ahead and fill. So I have a gray for the rings. And now I want to, let's go ahead and just give it a name real quick, like call this rings, just so it's easier to keep track. And now I'm going to also import the S and L part of the logo. Go ahead and select that and hit open. And I'm going to make this 12 again, so it's the same depth. I'll go ahead and leave a bevel, and we'll make this maximum quality again and hit done. And there's the S and L. Now keep in mind too that you'll notice that this isn't centered, and it's not basing it off of the image itself. What it's doing is taking a look at the model as a whole and saying, okay, I'm going to place it where I think it should be center-wise. And so it's a little off-center here. So you have to usually realign your objects to get them to match, which can be cumbersome, but it's at least easier than trying to rebuild the whole logo from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this as well, and I'm going to choose the other object, which is the S and L. And I knew it was kind of a blue. I could be exact again by getting the exact RGB color values, but I'm not going to worry about that for now. And I'm going to go ahead and move my object a little bit more center. And I'll bring my camera around and dolly in, I should say, in my object. So now I've got my objects imported in. And actually, I'll go ahead and name this one as well. Call this SL, so I have to keep track of it. And so now my objects are imported in the way I want them to be. Now, because we're going to first render this to Flash, we don't really want to add texture to these objects, because if we add texture, then the Flash render is going to not give us the right result. So we're already ready to go for the Flash render setup that we want. So let's go ahead and do a render test and see how this looks. And so I'll go ahead and set Flash, and I'll make the sampling level 4x4, and we'll go ahead and leave it gradient, and we'll turn outlines off. And background color, we'll leave it white, and we'll leave global ambient at that setting, and we'll turn shadows on. So while I go ahead and render this, also I'm going to want to make sure that I have my setting down kind of low for this particular example. So I'll go ahead and hit render and give this a name. Call it SL logo. And you want to edit this little replace thing out, I'm sure. So now you can see my Flash render here, and I'm getting, because I have gradients on, I'm getting this nice gradient. And actually I'm getting a really good look for what I'm wanting. I could change the specular highlight down on the object by adjusting my specular color down, or the roughness down, to get less of a highlight. But I actually like the look that I'm getting here, so we're going to go ahead and leave it for now. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and animate this. Now, since they're two separate objects, I can animate them separately, and that's what I'm going to do. And let's go ahead and make a loop, an animation loop here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the rings here, and I'm going to do a rotation loop on them here. So what I want to do is, let's go ahead and set my, I want it to be a 2-second loop. And let's go ahead and zoom in on here a little bit by, again, holding down the command or control key depending on if you're a Mac or PC, and clicking and zooming. And okay, so what I'm going to do now is, since Amorphium will make rotations go the shortest possible distance, I can't just have 2 keyframes for the rotation. I can't just have 0 and 360, because it won't move. And if I had 0 and 359, it's going to move 1 degree the opposite direction. So what I want to do is create 4 keyframes for the rotation. So I'm going to come, since halfway between, since I have 2 seconds here, I want to make it an even rotation. I'm going to go to 0.5 for the first keyframe, and I'll just go ahead and create a keyframe for the rings right here by control clicking on there, saying add keyframe. And I didn't quite get it right, so it's 5.1, so I can drag this back to 5.0 if I want. I could have done that by just clicking on the object, and here it would have added a keyframe for me as well. So now I've got a keyframe there. I'm going to go ahead and create a keyframe at 1, and we'll do that by just clicking on it and saying add keyframe. And we'll do another keyframe here at 150. Say add keyframe. And since I actually only need 4, I'm going to just make my animation go to 1.5 seconds here. Make the loop 1.5 seconds. So the first keyframe is 0. The second keyframe I want to make, I go to properties and change the rotation. And since I'm rotating on the Y, let's go ahead and make this 90. So I click OK. So now it's rotated 90 degrees. And then come to the next keyframe, and since I want it to rotate even more, another 90. I'll go 180. Actually, you know what? I'm going to need this at 2, actually. And go ahead and at this particular frame, make this 270. Oops. Now, since this is a pretty symmetrical object, I could have probably just made a loop of 180 and you probably wouldn't have seen the change. But just in case it isn't quite symmetrical, I'm going to go ahead and do enough keyframes for a complete 360. So I'll go ahead and make this one 360. And it could be 0 actually, because it doesn't know the difference. It just looks at it as a position in the rotation of the object. So now I should have a nice even rotation of my object. So this will loop now nicely when I render this out. So the next thing I want to do is maybe do an animation with the S and L, and let's go ahead and do a scale on them. I'll just go ahead and create a keyframe in the middle. I'll create one at the end. Okay, so now since I want to do a scaling animation, I'll go ahead and go back to the middle keyframe here, and I'll scale it down a little bit. So now I should have this scaling up and down while the thing rotates for my little flash animation. So now that I've got this animated the way I want, I'm going to go ahead and let me just save the project. So I'll save it as SL loop 1. So now I'm just going to go ahead and render out an animation, and so I come into animation here. I want to do from 0 to 2, and that should render my loop nicely. Now the thing is that since both 0 and frame 2 have the same exact keyframe, there could be a potential skip in the rotation. It could have a double frame there because both the 0 frame and the 2-second frame have exactly the same keyframe. So what I'm going to do, and let's make this 15 frames a second, is under number of keyframes, let's make this 29. Well, actually it's 15. And under my end keyframe here, I'm just going to nudge this back to like 1.9. Now you can see that it says 28. I want to get that to say 29 so that I get rid of the last frame. So I hit 9 again. You can see that now it's at the end is not quite at 2, but it's going to have 29 frames. So it shouldn't repeat that last frame. So that'll work nicely for the loop. So now I'm just going to go ahead and render this. And actually before I do that, let me go ahead and make sure that my flash settings are exactly what I want. I still have the gradient, I have the sampling level the way I want it, and I want to render to a flash animation now instead of a still. And I should have everything set the way I want. So now I hit render. And then I'm going to give it a name, call this SL loop 1, and then click save. So now this is the completed render with the animation. So you can see that we've got a nice seamless loop going on. So go back and wait a second. I think that's it. So that's basically how you would create a seamless loop and render to a flash file format. And just to show you once again, I'll display it because now it's been rendered and it's here as SL loop 1, and there it is. So that's basically importing a logo, doing an animation. I could have added text in there if I wanted by typing in text. But since the logo had text and everything built into it, I just brought it in, animated it, and rendered it out as a Flash movie.